Hey everyone, how are you guys doing? Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic day. Now, in the last video I talked about how the next couple of days of videos are going to be completely focused on the outline of that very first short story that we're really trying to hone in on and focus to be able to help you get to the end where you can actually publish this, right? Now, in some of the previous videos we've discussed, making the rules for your universe, deciding, does the history come from Earth and everything. And hopefully you've been able to start figuring some of that out. If you haven't, don't worry about it. It'll all start coming together as you move forward, okay? So in today's video, which is day 6 of our 30-day challenge here, we're going to discuss the beginning parts of your outline. So if you've never written a story before, you need to understand that your story needs a protagonist, right? That's the main character. The main person. They can be a good guy, a bad lady, they can be an alien, they can be anything, but it's the main character that your story focuses on. When you write a short story, you don't want to have a whole bunch of characters. You want to make sure that your one character is really honed in on, and that's where the whole story is going to center around. You're not going to be introducing subplots and all these extra things. A short story, we're aiming for, my recommendation, and we'll be getting into page formats and stuff later as we finally start putting words to page. But right now you're just doing basic outlines and stuff. But I would recommend that your whole short story should probably aim for around 40 or 50 pages. That's what I would do for your first one, okay? And so you need one main character, and they need to have one main problem that they have to deal with. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have plot twists and some interesting stuff. You want to make sure that you don't have a whole bunch of crazy stories that it really takes 100 or 200 or 300 pages for the protagonist to really get through all of them. If you feel that you have a really complex story, write all your ideas down, make sure it's all documented carefully, and then go think of a different idea. The reason being, now hear me out, I don't want to bum you out, but it's just because you don't want this one story to get so big that it ends up becoming a full novel. I want something that you should be able to write and edit and have proofreading within 2 months. I want you to be able to actually get this done so that you can finally say you're an actual published author. Yeah, it doesn't have to be, with some big publishing house because you had some big best-selling novel or anything. I'm trying to just get you to the point of feeling accomplishment that you actually are now a published author. All right? So we're trying to make a little bit sacrifices on the big stuff. I want you to write one short story first, and then we can build from there. So you have to have the main protagonist, whoever that is, you get to decide, and then you have to have a main antagonist. Now, the antagonist is like the anti to the protagonist, all right? I don't need to get all crazy in the definitions or anything. You just need to know that you have to have basically a good guy from the perspective of the story and then a bad guy from the perspective of the story. They don't necessarily have to be good or bad. You can have a bad guy. They've had stories like the Pirates of the Caribbean series, right? Those movies, Captain Jack Sparrow is not a good guy. He might be a decent person, but when you take a step back from the movies, he's a pirate. What do pirates do? They kill, they plunder, they steal, right? So he's not a good guy in that sense, but in the story, he was and became, in later movies, the main character. So he was the main protagonist, all right? So you need to figure out who the main character is and then the person or the element or the thing that's against the main character, all right? Now, as far as what I do, now every author, anybody you ask is going to have probably a different way of outlining their stories. They're going to have a different way of character creation. They're going to have a different way for pretty much everything because, writing is so creative that there's so many different ways to end up at the published point, right? So I would say for myself, and now this is completely me, there might be other authors who are watching and going to completely disagree with my outlining practices. I tend to outline loosely, and the reason for that is I find for myself, I don't have to have days or weeks or months of development for how my main character is. I want to sort of discover them as I'm writing a little bit. And I want that character to kind of be able to become their own. So what I go through and I do is I go through and I list a couple of things for my main character. I'm like, okay, what's their name? Where are they from? So in Revelations, there's a total of 195 different planets. So I just, I have my list of all the different planet names and everything, and I know which nations control which planets. And I say, okay, this main character's from this nation. He's from this planet. Just brief backstory about him or her. like what were they like growing up? Why are they where they are? If they're an officer in the military, or if they're a pirate, or if they're just a scientist, or whatever the main story is about with the main character. And then I also try to list, okay, what's their main goal in this short story? Is it to stay alive? Because it's like an escape type story. Is it they're like a detective and they're in search of something? Is it, they're a warrior and they're trying to defend, or they're trying to conquer something? So just kind of figure out what is their main goal in this short 40 to 50 page story. And it doesn't have to be their main goal. Like maybe their main goal is to be like president or something crazy, the leader, the emperor of the empire. But right now, this story, they're just trying to stay alive, right? It could be something that simple for this story. You just need to know what their main goal is in this story. And then I'll list a couple other things about them, like that just helps me when I'm imagining them. So I'll be like, okay, like how tall are they? What is their physical build? What color skin do they have? Because some of these things just help me just to visualize. Because the more that I can in my mind imagine what they look like, imagine sort of what they sound like, it just sort of starts to help a character to be developed. Another thing that I love to do is I will go through and I'll try to find a picture of what I imagine this person to look like. So I'll go through, pages of pictures, and that could be like male actors, female actors. It could be a certain ethnicity that I'm really looking for, that I'm like, okay, this needs to be, whatever I need for this story to kind of help me figure out what this person looks like, what they sound like, and that just helps me to, again, develop them in my imagination. Typically in the short stories, unless I know if a character is going to return at some other point, one of the sub-characters, I really only focus on the protagonist for myself. I really make sure I put most of my creative energy in the plot, the outline of the story, and then into the main character. Everybody else, I might do a little bit, okay, like what planet are they from? What is their main goal? A little bit about their backstory, but I don't spend as much creative energy up here. Other authors might tell you, no, man, I go through and I write it out. I know what their favorite color is. I know what their shoe size is. They go like really in depth. And that's great if that helps you. But for myself, it gets to a point where I end up feeling overwhelmed by how creative I've become, rather than doing the necessary parts and then focusing on telling a great story. So for me, that's the way that I do it. So once you spend some time working on the protagonist, if it helps you, especially if you're newer, it may help for you to go through and kind of do the same steps to the antagonist, if the antagonist is a person and not, like in one story I wrote for Revelations, one of my short stories, there was this one character. He was a commander in one of the nation's armies. He was defending his planet from one of the other nations that was invading. I didn't spend any time in the story talking about the other nation other than in combat. I never mentioned names. I never mentioned who it was. Or I mentioned which nation it was, but I never went into any depth developing anybody on that side. So the antagonist was the entire other nation that was invading. They were faceless. So your antagonist doesn't have to be a person. It could be a creature. It could be an army. It could be just the elements of the planet they're on, depending on whatever type of story. It could be just the emptiness of space. It could be whatever you want it to be. They're the thing that the protagonist is struggling against, right? So spend some time today trying to develop the protagonist. Do a couple details. Like I said, you're going to cover age is usually helpful. A little bit of backstory about them, where they're from, what are a couple of their interests, why are they where they are now, and then, what's their main goal in the short story. If you happen to know, okay, long term, they want to be, promoted in the military to like a general position, or they want to be the president of a company, or they just want to, find their father or something who's been missing for years. You can have those other big things, but right now in the short story, unless those are important, I wouldn't go too far developing what you want in the future, only because you want to kind of make sure you get through this. And as myself being creative, it's very easy for me to overburden myself with too much, like, oh, well, what if down the road? And then I end up kind of just beating myself up because I've piled so much expectation on that I can't just get through the story. So try not to do that. Try not to allow your imagination to just pile stuff on with what ifs when you haven't even finished the first story. Right? So the other thing that's really important, try to pick a picture. You can just Google a bunch of different actors, actresses, anywhere around the world. I mean, Google provides a lot of different picture images for you to be able to get, and I just try to keep looking until I'm like, okay, I think that type of person is kind of what I think that my character looks like. And tomorrow we're going to start getting into the outline of the actual story. And then, like I said, in the next couple of days, we're going to get more and more into this. But you really need to know kind of the overall idea of what you want to tell in the story. But you need to, as you get like a basic understanding of what the basics of the story are going to be, it's going to be important to know who your main character is. Now, that's sort of my thing. I mean, you could decide, I want to go with figuring out what's the main story first or the main character. I think you go either way. I sometimes go with the main character and like, okay, what story can I tell to really make this character really kind of shine? So that's what I do. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching, commenting, subscribing. If you have any other questions, please leave those down below. If you would like to follow us on Facebook, it is Learn to Write Sci-Fi. And if you'd like to follow us on YouTube, it is White Light Media. All right, guys, so this is day 6. Got a lot ahead of us to get through this 30-day challenge. And thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow.